The restaurant was nearly empty. That mattered, because what happened in the next hour wouldn't make sense to anyone who thought power was only about who could shout the loudest or throw the hardest punch. This was 1947, late November, and the kind of cold that made Manhattan feel like it was holding its breath. The tables were set with white cloths that looked gray in the dim light. A single waiter stood near the kitchen door, pretending not to watch. Frank Sinatra sat at a corner booth, his back to the wall, hands folded on the table in front of him. His tie was loosened. His hair, usually perfect, had a piece falling across his forehead that he hadn't bothered to fix. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Across from him sat Meyer Lansky. Meyer didn't look like what people expected. No gold rings, no loud suit. Just a gray overcoat, neatly buttoned, and glasses that caught the light from the street. He had the face of an accountant, someone you'd walk past without noticing. But Frank noticed. Everyone who mattered noticed. Because Meyer Lansky didn't need to look dangerous to be the most dangerous man in the room. They'd been sitting in silence for almost 5 minutes. Not the awkward kind. Not the kind where someone's waiting for the other person to break. Just silence. The kind that happens between two people who understand that some conversations don't start with words. Finally, Meyer spoke. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You look troubled." Frank exhaled slowly. "I got an offer." "I know." "You know?" Frank looked up, meeting Meyer's eyes for the first time since he'd sat down. "I make it my business to know," Meyer said. He didn't smile. But there was something in his tone that wasn't quite cold. "The question isn't whether you got an offer. The question is whether you're going to take it." Frank leaned back against the booth. The leather creaked under his weight. "It's a good offer. Big money. West Coast. New club opening. Wants me for residency. Guy says it'll make me bigger than I've ever been." Meyer tilted his head slightly. "And you don't trust it." "I don't trust who's behind it." "Smart." Meyer picked up his water glass, took a small sip, set it down with precision. "You want to know if I'm involved?" Frank said nothing. His silence was the answer. Meyer studied him for a moment, the way you'd study a chessboard before making a move you can't take back. "I'm not, but someone I know is. Someone who thinks using my name will make you say yes." Frank felt his jaw tighten. "They shouldn't use your name if you're not involved." "No," Meyer agreed. "They shouldn't. But people make mistakes when they think money's more important than reputation." There was weight in that sentence. Frank heard it, felt it settle somewhere in his chest. He'd made mistakes too. Everyone knew it. The gambling debts, the late nights, the times he'd been too loud in the wrong rooms, too angry in front of the wrong people. He'd burned through money like it didn't matter, and for a while, it hadn't. But now it did. "I need the work," Frank said quietly. It cost him something to admit that out loud. Meyer nodded. "I know. But you don't need that work." "How do you know?" "Because if you did, you wouldn't be here asking me." Meyer leaned forward, just slightly, his voice dropping even lower. "You came here because you know what happens when you take money from the wrong people. You know what it looks like when someone owns a piece of you. And you're trying to decide if it's worth it." Frank looked down at his hands. They were shaking, just barely. He pressed them flat against the table to make it stop. "I can't keep borrowing. I can't keep asking people for favors. I need something solid." "Then get something solid," Meyer said. "But don't confuse solid with desperate. Desperate makes you sloppy. Sloppy gets you killed. Maybe not today. Maybe not next year. But eventually. The waiter appeared, silent, refilling their water glasses without being asked. He disappeared just as quickly. Frank watched the water settle, watched the tiny ripples fade into stillness. "Why do you care?" Frank asked, his voice rough. "Why does it matter to you what I do?" Meyer sat back, his expression unreadable. "Because you're good at what you do, and good people are rare. Most people are mediocre and they don't care. Some people are talented and they waste it. But you," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "You have something people want to hear, something that matters. And I don't like seeing things that matter get ruined by stupidity." Frank felt something twist in his chest. It wasn't gratitude, exactly. It was something heavier. "You're not worried I'll embarrass you? Being seen with me?" Meyer almost smiled. "Almost. Frank, I've been seen with presidents and murderers. I'm not worried about being seen with a singer." The bluntness of it should have stung. But it didn't. It felt honest in a way most conversations weren't. Frank had spent years surrounded by people who lied to him. Managers who promised things they couldn't deliver. Friends who disappeared when the money dried up. Women who wanted the fame more than they wanted him. Honesty, even when it was hard, felt like clean air after being underground too long. "So what do I do?" Frank asked. Meyer looked at him steadily. "You walk away from the offer. You tell them thank you, but no. You don't explain. You don't negotiate. You just walk away. And then what? I got bills. I got people depending on me." "Then you work," Meyer said simply. "You take smaller gigs. You rebuild. You stop thinking fame is something you're owed, and start treating it like something you earn, every single night." Frank wanted to argue. He wanted to say it wasn't that simple, that Meyer didn't understand what it was like to stand on a stage and feel the audience slipping away, to hear the whispers that you're washed up, finished, yesterday's news. But looking at Meyer's face, at the calm certainty there, he realized Meyer did understand. Maybe not the music part, but the part about losing everything and having to decide whether to compromise or rebuild. Meyer understood that better than almost anyone alive. "You ever have to walk away from something big?" Frank asked. Meyer was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car horn blared, distant and sharp. "More times than you'd think. And every time I had people telling me I was making a mistake, that I was leaving money on the table, that I'd regret it." He paused. "But the thing about regret is, you don't regret the things you didn't take. You regret the things you took that you shouldn't have. The deals that seemed good until they weren't. The partnerships that felt necessary until they became chains." Frank absorbed that. He thought about all the times he'd said yes when he should have said no. All the times he'd let someone else make decisions for him because it was easier than thinking it through himself. What if I can't rebuild? The question came out quieter than he'd intended. Meyer looked at him without pity, without judgment. "Then you weren't as good as you thought you were. But I don't think that's true. I think you're scared. And scared people make bad choices." "I'm not scared," Frank said, but even he didn't believe it. "Yes, you are," Meyer said calmly. "And that's fine. Fear's useful. Fear keeps you alive. But fear also makes you think the only way forward is the fastest way forward. And fast usually means cutting corners. Cutting corners means cutting yourself." Frank ran a hand through his hair, finally fixing the piece that had fallen across his forehead. "You make it sound easy. It's not easy," Meyer said. "It's simple. Simple and easy aren't the same thing." They sat in silence again. This time it felt different. Not heavy, not light, just present. Frank could hear the kitchen sounds now, dishes clinking, water running, someone's muffled laugh, normal sounds, life sounds. The kind of sounds that kept happening whether you were on top of the world or scraping bottom. "I'll walk away," Frank said finally. Meyer nodded once. "Good. But I need you to understand something," Frank continued, his voice gaining strength. "I'm not doing this because you told me to. I'm doing it because I know you're right. And I can't keep pretending I don't know the difference anymore." Something shifted in Meyer's expression. Not warmth, exactly, but respect. "That's the first smart thing you've said all night." Frank almost laughed. Almost. "You always this encouraging?" "I don't believe in encouragement," Meyer said. "I believe in clarity. Encouragement is what you give children. Clarity is what you give men." Frank thought about that. About all the people who'd encouraged him over the years, telling him he was great, he was special, he was destined for incredible things. And how little any of that had mattered when the work dried up and the phone stopped ringing. "Can I ask you something?" Frank said. Meyer gestured with one hand. "Continue. Why don't you mix them? Business and music. You could. You got the money, the connections. You could own half the clubs in the city if you wanted." Meyer was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was even softer than before. "Because some things are worth more when you leave them alone. Music matters to people in a way business never will. It gets inside them. It changes how they feel, how they see the world. If I put my hands on that, if I make it about profit and control, I ruin it. Not just for the people listening, for the people making it." He paused, his eyes distant, like he was looking at something Frank couldn't see. "I've destroyed a lot of things in my life," Meyer continued. "But I've never destroyed something beautiful just because I could. And music is beautiful. It deserves to exist on its own terms, even if those terms are messy and complicated and don't make business sense." Frank felt something crack open inside him, something he'd been holding on to without realizing it. The fear that everything good in his life could be bought or sold, that nothing was sacred, that it was all just transactions dressed up as meaning. "You really believe that?" Frank asked. "I do," Meyer said. And the simplicity of it, the certainty, made Frank believe him. They finished their water in silence. When Meyer stood to leave, he buttoned his coat with careful precision. He looked at Frank one more time, his expression unreadable behind the glasses that caught the street light. "You're going to be fine," Meyer said. "Not because I said so, but because you finally figured out that fame isn't the same as respect, and success isn't the same as survival." He walked toward the door, his footsteps quiet on the tile floor. Frank called after him, "Meyer." He turned, waiting. "Thank you." Meyer shook his head slowly. "Don't thank me. Just don't waste it." And then he was gone. Frank sat alone in the booth for another 20 minutes. The waiter eventually brought him coffee he hadn't ordered. It tasted bitter and perfect. He drank it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through his chest, feeling the weight of the decision settle into something he could carry. He thought about the offer he'd turn down tomorrow, the angry phone calls that would follow, the people who'd tell him he was making a mistake, that he'd never get another chance like this, that he was finished. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was making a mistake. But it was his mistake to make. His choice. His life. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The years that followed were hard. Frank worked small clubs and struggled venues. He sang for crowds that didn't know his name and crowds that remembered it but didn't care anymore. He took gigs that paid barely enough to cover his debts. He rebuilt his voice, his reputation, his sense of who he was when the spotlight wasn't on him. And slowly, painfully, honestly, he found his way back. Not to where he'd been before. Somewhere different. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere that felt less like performance and more like truth. He never forgot that night in the restaurant. Never forgot the lesson Meyer had given him without asking for anything in return. Never forgot that some people, the ones who mattered, measured you not by how high you could climb, but by whether you knew when to walk away. He saw Meyer a few more times over the years, always in passing, always brief. They'd nod to each other across a room, acknowledge something unspoken, and move on. No long conversations, no favors asked or given. Just respect, the kind that didn't need words. When Meyer died, Frank read about it in the newspaper. There was no funeral he could attend, no public memorial. Just a quiet acknowledgement that one of the most powerful men in America had stopped existing, and the world would keep turning without him. Frank cut out the obituary and kept it in his wallet for years. He never explained why to anyone who asked, but he knew. He knew because Meyer Lansky had given him something more valuable than money or connections or opportunities. He'd given him the understanding that power wasn't about how much you could take. It was about knowing what to leave alone. That music and business could exist in the same city, in the same life, and never have to destroy each other. That some boundaries were worth protecting, even when it cost you. That walking away from the wrong thing was harder and braver than saying yes to everything that came your way. Frank Sinatra became a legend. But before that, in a quiet restaurant in Manhattan, he was just a man trying to decide who he wanted to be when the fame was gone and the noise had faded, and all that was left was the choice he'd made in the silence. And he chose well. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but well enough that when he sang, people heard something true. Something that couldn't be bought or sold or owned by anyone except the person making it. Meyer Lansky never touched the music. He protected it by staying away. And in doing so, he protected the man who made it. That kindness, that restraint, that quiet understanding of what mattered, it lived in Frank's voice for the rest of his life. In the way he phrased a lyric, in the pauses between notes, in the moments when he let silence do the work words couldn't. The world remembers both of them. One for the empire he built in shadows. One for the songs that made people feel less alone. They shared New York. They shared respect, but they never mixed what shouldn't be mixed. And both of them, in their own way, understood that some things are worth more when you leave them untouched. The restaurant is gone now. The booth where they sat has been replaced by something else, something modern, something that doesn't remember what happened there. But the conversation remains. Not in recordings or photographs or official histories, just in the space between business and beauty, in the understanding that power is knowing when to reach for something and when to let it be, in the recognition that the most important deals are the ones you don't make. Frank walked away that night. Meyer let him. And the music played on.